It's unusual, but not unheard of. Judges facing their own judgment day.
The lawyers, journalists and public stood outside.
Judges have been tried in courts. I suppose the most notorious and famous one was Justice Lionel Murphy of the High Court.
The judge has been found not guilty of attempting to pervert the course of justice.
And there are all sorts of other instances of judges behaving as human beings, like drunk driving.
Obviously, I respect and regard the decision of the court today.
It is unusual. I mean, judges are guardians of the law. That seems to sort of create some sort of inherent conflict because as a guardian of the law, they are now being judged. So, yeah, it does give rise to curiosities, complications and problems for the court.
One case has been creating curiosities and complications in Tasmania for months.
A Tasmanian Supreme Court judge has been found guilty of assault and emotional abuse.
Justice Gregory Geeson had pleaded not guilty to both charges and during the 7-day hearing in July took the stand himself.
Very keen angel. Assistant. Yep.
He denied allegations he was verbally abusive and controlling towards a former partner last year. Justice Geeson rejected the allegation of an assault on one evening, telling the court he'd never pushed or punched the woman and that she hit her head after drinking wine and becoming unsteady on her feet. He claimed finger marks on her chest were due to an accidental collision with his hand, and bruising could have been caused by him picking her up off the floor. But in her findings last week, Magistrate Susan Wakeling described parts of Justice Geeson's evidence as contrived, implausible and unconvincing.
It is my conclusion that the accused cannot be relied upon to give an honest and reliable account of events.
The magistrate found that one night, after seeing that the woman had received a selfie from a male colleague, Justice Geeson became enraged, grabbed her by the arms very tightly, shook her repeatedly and struck her repeatedly to the chest.
I am satisfied that the accused pushed the complainant with the unintended consequence that her head struck the mantelpiece. They were acts done in anger.
She found Justice Geeson subjected the woman to verbal abuse, including calling her a slut and persistently yelling and screaming at her. Justice Geeson hasn't been sentenced yet. That's due to happen in the middle of next month, and he hasn't indicated if he plans to appeal. Justice Geeson, can you tell us, will you be appealing?
I have more to say in due course.
Okay, and will you be stepping down from the bench?
I have more to say in due course.
Gold Walkley winner Richard Ackland has been writing on the law, lawyers and judiciary for 40 years.
A judge, like any other person, has a perfect right to defend themselves against charges and criminal charges that are brought against them. The difficulty for a judge who's still maintaining his position as a judge and hasn't resigned is that it brings the court into the equation. So there's some sort of reflection or adverse reflection on the court.
Gregory Peter Geeson was sworn into the Supreme Court of Tasmania in 2017 at a ceremony attended by his good friend, then Premier Will Hodgman.
Sincere congratulations on your appointment as a Justice of the Supreme Court of Tasmania.
Justice Geeson is no stranger to controversy. In 2021, he was counselled by the Chief Justice after a photo of him kissing his associate at a nightclub was published in a Hobart newspaper. After Justice Geeson was charged over the most recent matter in December, the state government ditched plans to suspend him via a parliamentary motion. Justice Geeson's lawyers had threatened High Court action and argued the move could be unconstitutional.
First of all, it raised a real question about whether there was a power to suspend a Supreme Court judge in Tasmania. And then it raised a separate issue, which was whether the power to remove a judge in Tasmania, the Parliament's power to remove a judge, was actually constitutional.
It was an incredibly awkward situation for the government and the Parliament to find itself in late last year. I'm sure the Tasmanian community would have expected that our Parliament could deal with situations that might arise in relation to members of our judiciary.
Fortunately for the government, Justice Geeson committed to not hear any cases while his matter was ongoing. He's been on paid leave from his $560,000 a year job since late last year, and with no indication of whether he plans to appeal or resign, it's unclear how long that may continue.
It's always regarded by courts that if a judge is charged, even before the trial, even before there's any verdict as to guilt or not guilty, the judge would resign in order to protect the court. But of course, Justice Geeson hasn't done that in this case. He's stuck to the chair at quite considerable expense to the taxpayers of Tasmania, and not only are they paying him, but they're paying a replacement judge to fill in for him.
Spurred into action by last year's events, the Tasmanian government has introduced a bill to establish a judicial council, also called a judicial commission in other states. Only Tasmania, Western Australia and Queensland don't have one.
The main purpose of such a body is to receive complaints about the conduct of judges, to investigate those complaints and to bring those complaints to a resolution, whether to refer it to Parliament to consider removal or to refer it back to the head of jurisdiction for some lesser consequence if the complaint's made out.
Professor Gabrielle Appleby is an expert on judicial integrity and constitutional law. She's concerned that while the state government's legislation, which has passed the lower house, clears up issues with the suspension of judges, it still has holes.
This bill leaves in place the lack of clarity around the power to remove Supreme Court judges in Tasmania. And I think that given we have a whole piece of legislation targeted at misconduct and potential removal of judicial officers, it's a real missed opportunity not to clarify that power.
Independent MP Meg Webb plans to move amendments to the bill in Tasmania's upper house.
I'm not convinced that what we've got at the moment is as robust as it needs to be.
The bill, I think, is well crafted, it's comprehensive, it's well balanced, and we've got all the necessary measures in there to ensure that we have high standards in our judiciary and it remains independent.
We know that judges are human. That's their strength. And we need to accept, and I think front up to the fact that judges are going to make transgressions, and there needs to be a mechanism in place whereby complaints about their conduct can be received, appropriately triaged, investigated and resolved fairly for the complainant, for the judge and for the public at large.